Well, hello and welcome back. Again, thanks to everybody for being so punctual with bouncing around from session to session. It's been a rather busy couple of days here. This is a very exciting session for me. I'm been looking forward to this for several months now as we started putting our agenda together and planning things out. I was spending a lot of time. I interviewed a number of product development folks, both at the carrier level and some independent consulting actuaries about what was becoming very evident to me, and that is that we're seeing, I don't know if it's safe to call it a proliferation, but we're certainly seeing a rise in the number of variable products that are being introduced. And as I started exploring and thinking about the implications of that, not only from a distribution side of things, but what it means to our producers, what does it mean to each of our firms. I thought of Bobby, and for those of you who don't know Bobby Samuelson, he doesn't really need an introduction. In spite of his youth, Bobby is a veteran. He's been around the industry. He was bred for this, literally and figuratively. Been around the industry for a long time. I know many of you subscribe to the Life Product Review. Bobby's the founder and the executive editor of Life Product Review. It's probably one of the most insightful pieces out there. If you don't subscribe to it, it's kind of a shameless plug here, Bobby. But I would encourage you to subscribe to that. Bobby's had a rich history in the life insurance industry. We go back, gosh, Bobby, nearly 20 years, I think. I met Bobby when he was an intern at NFP many years ago, and I've watched him, and we've had a chance to talk and debate a lot of things over the years. He spent a brief period as the head of product development for Bright House, Met at the time, and also owns his own product development consulting firm. And we're honored and we're thankful that he was able to carve out some time for us. He's actually doing us a big favor. He is vacationing with his family in Kiowa, and he's stepped aside to spend some time with us. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a number of things as it relates to VUL. Why is this happening? Why are we starting to see a rise and the increase in the amount of variable products that are out there? What is it going to look like? I don't know that we've seen the full effect of it yet, but over time, as we have a better understanding of why this is occurring, and we start thinking about what are the implications of that, and what's that mean going forward, and what it's going to look like. And then I think the last thing that we want to spend some time on is talking about what can you do to prepare for it. We'll spend more time on that in a few minutes. So, Bobby, let me open up by just ask you to give us some insight. We've watched. We had an economist with us yesterday, and I commented in my opening remarks that I don't know that we can spend enough time talking about the impact of the low interest rate environment. But above and beyond just the low interest rate environment, can you open up and share some of your thoughts about why you think that we're seeing this migration, this trend towards separate account products as opposed to the general account products that we've seen over the years?
Okay, so yeah, I think first of all, it's an honor to do this, and I know this has been something on your mind for a while, Craig, and certainly on mine too. So I'm glad we're doing this together. I'm excited to talk about all this. So in terms of low interest rate environment and why it's kind of pushing companies towards separate account products, I think the low interest rate environment has turned into something of kind of a buzzword in our industry, and it's sort of a catch-all phrase, I think, for a variety of almost separate but interrelated issues. And all of these things are pointing carriers towards separate account type products. So let me give you an example. So when we say low interest rate environment, typically what we think of in our kind of vernacular is, oh, carriers are going out, they're investing money, and they're earning lower yields. Therefore, they can't price guarantees the same way, or therefore they can't offer the same current assumption crediting rates or indexed UL caps. And that's what's driving them towards separate account products. And that is certainly true. I mean, that is absolutely a part of the story is carriers are going out, they're investing money, and they're just not earning the yield that they used to earn. And therefore, general account products don't look as attractive as they used to look. And I think that's an undisputable fact. I think there's also another angle to it too, though, which is that it's not just that carriers are going out and earning less yield. It's that in order to earn really any yield in today's environment, carriers have to take risk. And so if you kind of roll the clock back to 2012, 2013 or so, when interest rates really started to bottom out and reinvestment yields really started to bottom out after the financial crisis, companies had to get really creative with how they were investing their assets. And so they started to invest in all sorts of things that were sort of new asset classes, more exotic types of lending. CLOs is kind of a big buzzword. Some companies were doing, crazy things like rail car financing. I mean, all kinds of wacky stuff out there. And yeah, I mean, just anything under the sun. And I think what we've seen since the COVID kind of coronavirus deal is a lot of those asset classes that were delivering above market returns and were AAA rated and looked very safe. There have been some serious cracks in those asset classes. And I think in general, it's made insurance companies a little less willing to be the investment manager. In an environment where bond yields are falling, which means you're always getting these realized gains on your bonds. Everybody wants to be an asset manager. That's what the carriers have been dealing with for the last 30 years. Now we're kind of bottomed out. Carriers took a lot of risk on the asset side of the house. The coronavirus crisis, I think, exposed some of that. And now carriers are going, it's not just that I'm not earning a lot of yield. It's that I'm actually taking quite a bit of risk in getting the yield that I'm getting. Maybe I don't want to be in the asset management business anymore. Well, what's the option? What's the alternative? You go to a separate account type product where the client can invest directly in other types of, separate account assets, mutual funds and stuff like that, versus the life insurance company and being the investment manager. So Craig, when I think about low rate environment, I think you got to kind of include both sides of the house. It is that you're earning less yields, but it's also that the carriers took a lot of risk. And both of those things are kind of pushing carriers towards wanting more separate account type business, at least on the life insurance side.
Thank you. You made a comment when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and I've actually jotted it down. It's a quote. I think we'll probably see it again, but you made the comment to me that companies are reacting to forces beyond their control.
Yeah.
And I think that really is. It's not like there's some, conspiracy going on that, or that there's something evil in this. This is a reaction to things that are happening that they don't really have any control over, and they're being forced to make some decisions. So we talk about the asset side of things. There's a flip side to that, and that's the liability side of this equation. Can you speak to that and talk about kind of the interaction between the asset side and the asset management side?
Yeah.
And compare that to the liability side of things.
Yeah, so on the liability side, I think the impact of low rates has been a little more straightforward. I mean, there's really kind of, in my mind, two big pressure points on the liability side. One is, for a long time, carriers have been in the business and in some companies are still in the business of writing guaranteed products that assume an increase in interest rates. And third quarter is actually a big quarter for a lot of publicly traded life insurance companies because they do their actuarial reviews. And over the last couple of years, what we've seen is carriers consistently revising downward their long-term interest rate expectation. Well, that's great for, it's great that they're figuring it out now, but the reality is they put a ton of the business on the books that relies on a rising or higher rate environment, and they're just not getting those yields. And so from a liability standpoint, you now have this massive pool of liabilities out there that was priced at interest rates that are really quite high, at least relative to where their expectations are today. So I think companies are generally going to be a lot less willing to do that in this kind of persistent low rate environment. There are still a couple of companies out there doing it. God bless them. I hope they do it for a while because those are great products, but I don't think that's going to be where the industry goes. That's not the future of the industry, is more of that. And then I think in terms of the other kind of liability side of the house, crediting rates, caps on indexed UL products. I mean, we have seen enormous decreases in both credited rates on universal life, but especially caps on indexed UL. And, one of the big stories early on for IUL was that IUL was a way to avoid pressure from interest rates. Well, I think what everybody's realized now is no, IUL is every bit as much of a victim of pressure on reinvestment yields as universal life is. Now it materializes differently and it can look very different because there's also an option pricing piece of the puzzle. But only one company in the entire industry that I know of has not decreased caps this year. So we have seen an incredible drop in caps. Now, to your point, that's not companies making bad decisions. That's not companies doing things that are evil or nefarious. This is, to your point, and I said it earlier, these are companies reacting to things outside of their control. and making actually very prudent and smart and reasonable decisions in light of these things outside of their control. But the reality is the pressure is still there, and this is how they have to react to the pressure. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing a lot of pressure on the liability side. And so again, the question becomes, how do you show an attractive product where the insurance company is no longer the investment manager, no longer on the hook for all these yields? How do you get out of that kind of trap? And variable life is kind of the way to do it.
So it's a shifting of risk from the carrier ultimately to the policyholder. I guess it's safe to say that maybe while we don't recognize it at this moment as a fire sale on, say, GUL, there's a good likelihood that those products are going to become fewer and fewer. And there's challenges at the carrier level that you don't want to be the last one standing. And yet it's still an attractive product, and it's still important to an awful lot of people. So I don't want to create a false, this is not like hollering, fire in the theater, but we may see these, the few remaining products that are out there, GUL type products that have got a shortened lifespan as a result of that. You mentioned indexed UL, and we've talked for many years about IUL. We shared our philosophies and our differences. I know you've spent a large part of the last 10 years plus talking about IUL, the pros and the cons. Yep. We're right on the precipice of AG 49A. And I'd like your thoughts, and I'll preface this by saying I've had multiple conversations at the carrier level about to what extent is AG 49A potentially driving the interest in separate account products. Let me explain that. When AG 49A hits, and many of these products that have multipliers and enhance, not that there's anything wrong with them, they're priced, they're built in. As long as you understand what you're buying and you're willing to accept the risk, there can be some upside there. But when AG 49A is fully in effect, carriers not going to be able to illustrate those higher illustrated rates. And so what we're starting to see is some carriers that are taking the index sub-accounts that have these embedded multipliers and enhancements, and they're sliding them into variable products. Yep. There is a different illustration rule for variable as opposed to general account or even IUL. Some of you that are watching or listening may remember an organization called Market Metrics. They publish results all the time about what producers are thinking and saying and doing and what consumers are. And they always have a little box up in the corner that they call the liar's box. I'm not suggesting that I'm not getting the full story, but I don't know that the carriers have embraced the fact that AG 49A is having as much of an impact. But what are your thoughts about how AG 49A could be having an impact on this movement over towards VUL?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's the way I think about it. I think about it as the underlying macroeconomic conditions around IUL have been deteriorating for 3 or 4 years. And so when you think back to when AG 49 was crafted, the price of a 10% cap, so for a carrier to go out and hedge a 10% cap, was about 3.8%. The price to hedge a 10% cap right now is about 4.9%. Yeah. Wow. So the economics behind IUL have been deteriorating alongside insurers' reinvestment yields deteriorating. So we've seen declining portfolio rates and rising option prices. That's if you imagine that's a cross of death right there. That's the last thing you want if you're doing IUL. And so how did carriers respond to that? Well, part of the way they responded to it was by baking in more multiplier type features, which in a way sort of mask if you have a low cap, one way you can still have high performance with a low cap is to have a big multiplier. And so what a lot of companies did was said, the economics are starting to deteriorate. How do I keep my illustrated performance high? A lot of stuff that was allowed under AG 49. And by the way, I'm kind of with you on multipliers. It's not that they were nefarious. These were functions of AG 49. This was explicitly allowed in AG 49. Clients may or may not have really understood what was going on, but it wasn't like carriers were breaking the rules. Carriers were in perfect accordance with the rules. But that was their main methodology to sort of get away from the deteriorating economics of the product. And so now that AG 49A takes that tool away from them, the weakness in the economics in IUL is going to become more obvious. And then to your point, if you take it out of an IUL wrapper and you put it inside of VUL, not only do you not have to conform with AG 49A, you don't even have to conform with AG 49. And so, we can go back to pre AG 49 where you could put an exotic index in there, or an exotic crediting strategy, or some sort of exotic feature that illustrates fantastic benefits in a VUL product, but would not illustrate well under AG 49 or AG 49A. Well, again, that's allowed in VUL. And so I think we've already seen some carriers sort of roll that out. Now, to your point, is this in the liar's box, right? No one's willing to kind of admit it. I think that may be part of the case, because companies aren't really clear on what they're following or not following in a VUL, because the reality is they don't have to tell you what they're following or not following, because it's not part of the guideline. So yeah, I do think that's part of it. I do think AG 49A is putting pressure on IUL. Again, the fundamentals have been deteriorating for a while, but that's sort of now taking away the tools the carriers had to mitigate some of that, which means, to your point, IUL suddenly is going to look less attractive. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was looking at a case yesterday. Current situation under AG 49 was illustrating $390,000 of income. Switch it to AG 49A, it's illustrating $130,000 of income.
Wow.
Huge.
Wow.
I mean, that's an astronomical difference. And it's the difference between the client exchanging the policy that they own and not doing the exchange. That's the difference. And I think there are a lot of clients in situations like that.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Clearly, change is coming. And so from where you sit and from what you have seen, what's it going to look like? We call this VUL 2.0. Why VUL and why now? In your mind, what does VUL 2.0 look like? Maybe it's 3.0, I don't know, but it's something different than what we knew back in the late 90s, that's for certain. What's VUL 2.0 going to look like?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some cool innovation that comes out that you and I just shooting the breeze are not going to think of. And I think that's what's really exciting about this next phase of product development is in the same way that IUL turned into things that we couldn't conceptualize, VUL is probably going to do that too. And, IUL had a good 12 years of a lot of change, and VUL may have another good 12 years of a lot of change. So I'm excited for it no matter what it looks like. What do I think it's going to look like? I think there's going to be two big categories. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in the guaranteed VUL space. If you look at the products on the market today, that is one particular breed of guaranteed VUL. And by the way, I would argue that a lot of those guaranteed VUL products, not every company is going to be willing or able to sell those. And so, but there is some power, there's an incredible power in this concept of putting a guarantee on a VUL wrapper.
I agree.
And those guarantees are going to need to change and evolve so that we see different types of them, more of them, in the same way that if you look back to variable annuity with living benefits, that changed a huge amount from 2003 until 2013. So I think that's kind of one big category. And I think the other big category is we're going to see, and you've already alluded to this, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, we're going to see a lot more indexed accounts inside of variable life. And we're going to see the definition of an indexed account expand. So we're used to seeing very particular types of indexed accounts, indexed accounts with 0% floors, and then recently indexed accounts with charges to buy more upside. If you look over onto the annuity side of the business, the hottest selling product, the conversation on everyone's lips. I mean, I literally got an email from a reporter like 2 minutes before I logged into this asking for a quote on an article about this. These RILA products, these structured annuity products, are the fastest growing part of the annuity business. It is impossible in my mind to think that the innovations happening on the annuity side of the world are not going to percolate into VUL, and we're not going to see things like structured accounts inside of VUL. So when I think of VUL 2.0, it's a death benefit story, different new types of guarantees, and it's an accumulation story. And it really is sort of the real incorporation of an indexed sub-account, structured sub-accounts inside of VUL. And then I guess, actually now that I want to add one more thing, the other big trend in the annuity space recently has been fee-based annuities.
Yep.
We don't really have fee-based VUL. We did, TIAA-CREF offered it, they got out of the business. There will be a market. It may not be the big market, but it will be a market for some form of a fee-based VUL product. And I think that's part of the future as well.
I somehow sense that when people think or talk about moving index sub-accounts into a variable chassis, that there's something, odd about that. I'm just a big believer. I've always believed in the IUL product, sold to the right person with the right understanding, right set of circumstances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just a big believer that, coming out of the financial crisis in 2010, where people being risk averse, everybody was risk averse. Most people were. But just because somebody was once risk averse doesn't mean they'll always be risk averse. And likewise, you take somebody like myself that's nearing retirement. Not that I'm planning on going anywhere
I
anytime
was about to
soon.
say.
No, that's not a hint or anything. I'm not going anywhere. But as I get closer to it, the likelihood that I'm going to be as risk accepting as I am today or have been, the ability, I think it makes VUL more powerful than it's ever been. The ability to utilize that without tax consequences or ramifications, and the ability to use that as an allocation tool is so powerful.
Yep.
It's not even funny. Now, you mentioned one more thing, and then I'll go to Greg's questions. You said the word structured. Can you talk just for a moment about where you think structured accounts might come into play in all of this, and what, again, on the horizon, what that may mean?
Yeah, well, I'm going to dovetail on what you said, which I think is exactly right. And you and I have had so many conversations about IUL, I can't even count. And you told me even before this conversation, you said everybody thinks you're an IUL hater. I'm not an IUL hater. I'm really not, because sold to the right person on the right conditions, it makes sense. But I'll tell you, if you put it inside a VUL product, the number of people where it becomes the right story dramatically increases, because to your point, there's a time for indexed UL. So if you have to have indexed UL forever, you got to find a particular client. But if you got to find a client who at some point in their life is a great fit for IUL, well, that's all of us, because we all get to that phase where we're willing to take a lot of risk to get a lot of return. And then we start to kind of need to step off the gas, moving into retirement. Everyone goes through that phase. And so finding a client who's permanently like that, which is a fit for IUL, is very different than selling a VUL product to someone where you say, hey, in 20 years, you're really going to want this option. And they say, yeah, you know what? I really am going to want this option. This is a great fit for my story. So I'm with you. I think indexed accounts should have always been in VUL, and I think it's the natural best fit for the structure. Now, the great thing is when you get to structured crediting. So structured crediting, the concept behind structured crediting is very simple. So the concept is basically take more risk than IUL, get more upside. So for example, rather than having a 0% floor, you have a negative 10% floor. And the negative 10% floor, there's a value to that. And that value is the cost of the put option that you're essentially selling. And then you use the proceeds to buy more caps. So instead of having a 0% floor and a 10% cap, you might have a negative 10% floor and a 22% cap or a 24% cap. And so the concept of it from a conversational standpoint is, if you think about IUL, sort of fixed accounts are all the way over here in the risk spectrum. Indexed accounts are kind of right here. Full on separate account equities are over here. Structured accounts can range anywhere in this sleeve right here, because you could have a negative 10% floor, a negative 20% floor, participation rates on the upside, all kinds of stuff. And again, that's what's happening in the annuity world, is these products are proliferating because they are a way to get equity-like returns.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly, with some level of protection. And they work. I mean, look, my team, the Shield had come to MetLife, and then I built all the new versions that are being sold today when I was at MetLife. And I came to be a believer in the story and in the structure, especially inside of a wrapper where you have all the options. So now you might have fixed accounts, indexed accounts, structured accounts, and regular old sub accounts all in the same chassis. It's the Swiss Army knife of life insurance.
It absolutely is.
What else could you need? One last quick comment on this though, Craig. So you and I are both believers in indexed accounts and VUL. One of the challenges is, though, that not every agent is a registered rep. So I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but I think that's one of the challenges is, why was IUL so popular? Because anyone could sell it. And I think we have to kind of come to grips. It wasn't because it was necessarily the best application of it. It was because everyone could sell it. VUL, though, is the best application because it lives inside the full universe. And we got to embrace that as an industry of being a comprehensive package.
That leads into a whole nother conversation, candidly. Bobby, I don't know if you have thoughts on it. I'm concerned. Let me just say this. I'm very concerned, depending upon where that suit may go, and what the ramifications or what the other, far-reaching impact of that could be across the industry, not just to that particular carrier that many of us are familiar with. Bobby, I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. I think we could debate this and talk about it.
No, I would echo what you said, which is there could be far and wide ramifications, and it's just way too early to tell. That suit, when you really read the suit, there are two separate issues. There's that product, and then there's IUL products as a whole.
In general.
It's
Yep.
way too early to tell whether or not it's going to step across the bounds and go to all of them, or just be about that product.
And will it ever even get to, trial for that matter, or is this a settlement waiting to happen, and then that's a game changer? So there's a lot of implications. I just think it's beyond the scope of what we can do. Yes.
Yeah, I'd be really curious what you think, Craig, but I think that we probably don't have sufficient framework for it right now. So I think that maybe one of the challenges is it's hard to I think nobody has a really good, clear rubric for where indexed UL falls. My hunch is that in a VUL product where you have fixed, indexed, structured, and sub accounts, indexed UL the indexed accounts fall on the more conservative side of the house, which means there are probably more clients who are more suitable for that. Because you can easily compare it to structured accounts, which have more downside and more upside risk. So I think I've always believed, and this is again where I kind of buck the trend. I've always believed that IUL is actually a very conservative crediting strategy, and I would argue so conservative that you shouldn't expect a lot of extra return out of it. But where it falls on the spectrum is really kind of in the fixed income sleeve. It's fixed income plus rather than equities minus, and I think that's kind of where it needs to live from a suitability standpoint too.
Great point. Those that know me very well, I'm a dreamer. I like to think about things that could happen. This is actually a concept that I brainstormed about back in my days at ING back a number of years ago. I thought it was the perfect vehicle. The question as it relates to risk tolerance, I think if you take a risk tolerance questionnaire and you overlay it on top of a VUL product with appropriate index sub-accounts in there, you can literally solve virtually any risk tolerance that anyone could possibly have. Now, we tend to think of VUL as for those that are more aggressive. It's not necessarily the case. And the ability for us to take that product that has that versatility from, a general account, fixed interest bucket, through bonds, through index sub-accounts, all the way over to structured, and then to the equity side of things, and wrap it in a tax-advantaged product. And let's not lose sight of the fact that it's going to mature for 10 to 15 times more in the event of an untimely death. Who else has got anything that could match that? So I think the risk tolerance piece of this doesn't frighten me. I think it is a big advantage for why we're going to see, I think, I'm not going to say hockey stick. I'm trying to avoid all of these, these phrases that are crazy. But I think we're going to see a pretty steady ascent. That's just my personal opinion on the VUL side of things.
I just want to bring one quick thing you brought up that you've said a couple of times I want to tag onto, which is tax efficiency. So think about that full spectrum of returns. But if you did that outside of a life insurance wrapper, obviously all these, and you wanted to move from structured to index, you would have an incredible amount of turnover. And because structured and index both use derivatives, chances are good you might actually get ordinary income tax treatment on those gains. All of that is wrapped inside a VUL contract where you can seamlessly transfer it with no tax incidents. I mean, it's actually, that is one of the most powerful benefits about doing these types of strategies inside of life insurance, is to avoid that tax friction. So you brought it up twice and you reminded me, but I think it's an important point to remember.
Bobby, I think I shared this example with you, and it is an exaggerated example, but one of the things that brought all this into light for me, I was having one of these conversations I referenced, and I was given an example. Let's say we've got $100 million that a carrier has got that they're either using to hedge, or that they've got investment, they've got a hurdle rate. Let's just, for easy math, call it 10%. Portfolio yields have come down. They're less than 5, but let's just call it 5%. So on that $100 million, they're going to earn 5, but their stakeholders are expecting 10. Where's that extra 5 going to come from? That's the challenge that's before them. Well, some people believe, I don't know that this is going to have as big an impact, Bobby, I'd like your thoughts on this, but by gaining the fee income that variable products can generate, can it close the gap? I don't think it closes it anywhere near completely, but is it possible to close that gap a little bit with the asset fees that carriers are getting off of the sub accounts that are inside VUL products? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think that's a good way to think about it, which is that carriers have been expecting a spread on general account assets If you look at over the last few years, though, what they've really been doing is actually shifting more of their profitability from into policy charges and providing and basically earning less spread. So think back to caps maybe 7 years ago in IUL products.
Yeah.
Caps were not that much lower than they are right now. Well, how is that possible given that option prices have come up and portfolio rates have come down? Well, what carriers have been doing is they've been charging more policy charges, and IUL has become demonstrably more expensive from a policy charge standpoint because they're taking less spread on the assets and propping up to a higher cap. So carriers are already in an environment where they're basically earning nothing in terms of spread on their invested assets. Now, to your point, Craig, that deteriorates the economics of the products unless you pull it out of policy charges. And so carriers have been doing that anyway. And so when you look at the profitability of an IUL, for example, which is an accumulation-based product, it's all coming from policy charges. It's not coming from investment spread, or at least in general, it's not. And so when you look at a VUL product, what does VUL product have? VUL product has policy charges. Carrier will make their money on policy charges. And then to your point, Craig, they may make more spread actually on the VUL than they do on the policy charges. So for example, if you look at most VUL products in today's market, those VUL products borrow the same fund lineup as from the company's VA products. All right, VA is a is a fee-only product where you have to make your money off of the M&E. And so what a lot of carriers do is they bake extra fees into the funds so that they can earn an extra spread off of the funds. So funds in a VA are more expensive than they kind of should be because the carrier is making a spread behind the scenes. Those same funds are used in a VUL product, which means actually you're baking in more spread into a VUL than you are into an accumulation IUL product. Oh, and by the way, VUL, at least allocated to separate accounts, VUL costs less in terms of capital. The RBC factors are lighter on a VUL product. So VUL theoretically should be actually a lot more profitable than a UL product because again, the capital is less and theoretically the earnings are going to be higher and you actually are earning a spread on the assets, whereas you really aren't in today's accumulation product. So I don't see any sort of pricing issue with switching to VUL. I see a lot of tailwinds for doing that, frankly. I
want to be very clear, and I think you would agree with me here. I hope you do. That none of this is bad. None of this is bad. You know, if a carrier earns more fees, then good for them. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It enables them to create a better product for the consumer and for us to be able to go out into market. So there's nothing that's bad about this. We just need to understand why it's occurring. And I think the more we understand it, then we can either choose to embrace it. And that's where I want to go from here.
I don't think carriers are going to abandon guaranteed UL or abandon IUL. It's a question of where the money is going to go for new product innovation and where the marketing efforts, you know, think back to 2008. What was every carrier working on? They were all working on guaranteed UL. And they were all focusing their fire hose of product development money and time and effort and innovation and energy into guaranteed UL. That fire hose shifted into IUL, and we got all the IUL products we have today. And I think what we're really saying is that the fire hose is going to shift towards VUL because that seems to be the best place to go. But GUL hasn't gone away. IUL hasn't gone away. Even there are still even, believe it or not, current assumption UL products out there these days. So it's not that these products are going to go away. It's simply that the new product development efforts and the marketing support and the kind of drive we think are going to push more towards VUL. But of course, carriers are going to maintain their IUL products. Some carriers will still offer GUL. I mean, there will still be a robust product portfolio. It's just that the new energy is going to go into VUL. That's at least kind of what we were saying in our thought.
I would agree with you. So the dilemma in all of this then is, and that's where the question that Greg just asked is, what are we going to do about it? As you referenced a minute ago, we watched over the last decade as many advisors, producers, financial advisors abandon their FINRA registration in favor of IUL, certainly in the insurance community. We've watched RIAs that have IARs that have abandoned their FINRA registration in favor of SEC registration, which precludes them from selling variable or registered products. So there's challenges there. So the question that, and this is unfortunately we've only got a couple more minutes. There's a number of things that come up. There's the paradox of distribution. We've got carriers that are going to be turning that fire hose into VUL, and we've got a distribution environment that's taken it the other way. And so how is it that we're going to get those two to come back together? If I am an IDA partner now, or if I'm working inside of an IDA, if I'm not registered, I think I have to give, I really got to go there. I don't think I've got a choice. So we've got to think about ourselves being registered, and then we've also got to start thinking about where we start finding producers. That's in the institutional space. It's in the IBD world. It's it's the old adage. If you want the chicken pox, you got to go where the chicken pox are. And so we're going to have to find those. We'll have more conversation about that. Bobby, I can't thank you enough. It's a short notice. Thank you for taking time out of your vacation to do this. It's a treat to have you with us. We'll talk more. I think that you would be welcome to come back, and maybe we can extend this conversation a little bit deeper at another time. So thank you very much. We're going to adjourn. We've got another session to get to in literally 1 minute. Bobby, thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you all soon. Take care.